Osweiler just has to make sure he doesn't lose the game for them. I expect them to rattle Jay Cutler, and I'm going to pick the Broncos to win this game.
That's up to avoid pressure. Wide open is Demaryius Thomas in the middle of the field. He's got it. The big receiver loose. Stiff arm himself free down the sideline. Thomas racing for the pylon, and Demaryius Thomas has a Denver touchdown. Four-man rush. Osweiler throws in the end zone. Touchdown, Denver! He threw a strike to Cody Latimer, and the Broncos now lead 16-9.
The Broncos win in Chicago minus Peyton Manning in a more under-center offense. Quite a 25th birthday present for Brock Osweiler, who made his first NFL start and got the victory. He had 2 TDs, no interceptions, a 2-point road victory. No Peyton, no problem, it appears. Skip, how will this quarterback situation play out?
You know what, Molly, Stephen A.? This is starting to smell to me like the end of Peyton in Indy. The sad, sorry end of Peyton in Indy, when he was eased, if not shoved, out the back door because Andrew Luck was there as both the present and the future. And again, it's starting to feel like this franchise is caught up in making Brock Osweiler not only its future, but its present now. And if that's true, if I'm reading this correctly, they are making a dangerous mistake. They are dangerously overreacting because I think they're reading way too much in, if they are, they're reading way too much into what Brock Osweiler did in Chicago yesterday. I admire the kid for making no turnovers, no interceptions, no fumbles. He did throw 2 touchdown passes, though one of them to Demaryius, the first one, 48 yards.
He made that.
I don't even know what happened. It's like Chicago just forgot to cover. Wait, Demaryius, wait, that's the guy you probably should cover? If of all their receivers, I would cover that guy first with 2 people. And he runs a crossing route, and he's like, oh, well, I guess if nobody's going to cover me or tackle me, I guess maybe I should just keep going. And he did 48 yards for a touchdown. So I'm looking at Brock Osweiler after the game, and he acted like he had just won a playoff game. And I know he's excited. And again, it's hard. I didn't hear the whole interview. I just heard snippets, so maybe I'm being unfair to young Brock. But even though he said, I'm paraphrasing his quote, every minute behind Peyton, I was preparing for my chance. It didn't come across that he was paying that much respect to the great, all-time great Peyton Manning. It felt like he was pretty caught up in, I just won my first game, and I'm going to be the quarterback of the Broncos now. Bring on Tom Brady in Denver. You know what? I did pick Jay Cutler in this game. I did not know he was going to be without Alshon Jeffrey. I knew he was going to be without Matt Forte. I was not sure about Eddie Royal. None of those 3 played for Jay Cutler. And you realize, Brock Osweiler, John Elway, this came down to Jay Cutler driving his team down for a touchdown, putting them in position to go for 2 to tie the game at 17 near the end of the game. And for reasons I don't know, they took the game out of Jay Cutler's hands, which I would not have done at that point, and they ran basically the same play that they had just scored on, if we could see that. And it got stuffed at the line of scrimmage, so that's how close the Denver Broncos with Brock Osweiler came to at least going to overtime in Chicago. So let's not get too carried away about beating the Bears without Alshon, Forte, and Eddie Royal, 3 of the best weapons that Jay Cutler has, obviously. So in the end, I admire what the kid did. We know their defense is a stud defense, one of the top 3 in the league, and it came to play yesterday and did a pretty good job on my guy, Jay Cutler. I don't think he ever got rattled. He threw for 265 yards, which is pretty decent against that defense. But in the end, this team is going no place this year, nowhere this year, without Peyton Manning. And I'm going to say what I said last week. This is just my view from a distance. If, in fact, they have shelved Peyton Manning for the rest of this year, whether for performance or for injuries, and he seems to have 3 of them he's battling right now, if he doesn't get to finish this year, I believe he will play another year, and I believe, if necessary, that year will be someplace besides Denver, because that's the way Peyton is built. And it might be at this point starting to be out of spite as much as out of desire, because that's what happened with Indy.
You know, it's interesting that you use that analogy when you talked about them trying to ease Peyton Manning out the door, because I really didn't think about that, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. This this smells a lot like him going out of Indy. He was injured, had the surgeries. They knew they had the #1 overall pick, and they wanted to move him out the door.
And remember, their doctors indicated to Jim Irsay that he wasn't going to be able to play at all anymore. So that was how they viewed it.
Right, but I think that's where I was going, because I think the difference that we have to highlight is that they were pushing him out the door not only because they weren't sure as to whether or not he was going to be able to play, but also because they had the #1 overall pick, and they knew it was going to be Andrew Luck, and that's why they were willing to make that move. In this particular instance, you got a guy in Brock Osweiler, and you're like, he's no Andrew Luck, in terms of projection or anything like that.
I don't know. Maybe they think he is.
Maybe they think he is.
6 feet, 8 inches tall.
That would be news to us, because that's not the impression that we've gotten. He's been on the bench. He's been waiting his turn, and there's nothing wrong with that, because we see that it worked for Aaron Rodgers. But in the end, what it comes down to is that when I look at his performance, 20 of 27, 250 yards, no interceptions whatsoever, 2 TDs, a 127 quarterback rating, I'll give him props where it's due. My belief, however, is this. This team was built to try and win the Super Bowl now. And there's no way in hell you can convince me that it's going to happen. Like, for example, and I was thinking about this, and I was just looking it up, Skip. When I think about things like this, scenario similar to Peyton Manning, I think about Dan Marino.
Yep.
What I think about Dan Marino is this. Dan Marino comes into the league. It's 1983.
Yep.
He's a first rounder. What happened, Skip Bayless? They're going in there. They're 5-2. But they still hand the reins to Dan Marino. He goes 7-2 in the last 9 games as a starter. He's the heir apparent. He's the new dude on the block because he throws 20 touchdowns with just 6 interceptions his first year. The second year, they go 14-2 and go to the Super Bowl. They just ran into the 15-1 San Francisco 49ers led by Joe Montana. Enough said. I'm pointing all of that out to say this. When I look at Brock Osweiler, I could see this guy making some noise. I could see him potentially doing some things. But what does it matter if Tom Brady's standing in his way? You have got to give yourself the best chance to pull that off. And I don't care how good Brock Osweiler looks. You can't have Peyton Manning overcoming his plantar fascia, all right, being ready to come back out on that field with the experienced personnel you have in place to try and go for a Super Bowl championship, and then come playoff time. Well, Peyton, you can stay on the side because we going to roll with Brock Osweiler. That's nonsense to me. That's not even something that should be contemplated. Brock Osweiler should be in there for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only. #1, because you're in the future, and let's get you as many reps as we possibly can prior to that. But #2 is let's get you these reps while resting Peyton Manning. So when Peyton Manning is rested, we can now hand him the ball and say, deliver us the goods.
Okay.
There's nobody in Denver that's going to have, if Peyton Manning is healthy enough, if his arm is rested, his plantar fascia has been healed, he can go out there and play. There is nobody with sense that's going to have a problem with John Elway or Gary Kubiak and say, you know what? We got a problem with you bringing Peyton Manning back into the lineup. That's just asinine. So I say rest him as much as you possibly can get away with resting him, to get him as ready as he possibly can be for the playoffs. In the meantime, Brock Osweiler is getting his reps. Now sit your behind down and watch the artist himself go to work for one last time. 18 years of greatness doesn't get to be omitted because of plantar fascia, particularly if it's healed.
Okay, I hear you. I'm somewhat influenced by the Mike Sando story on ESPN.com that we talked about last week, in which he quoted several personnel directors around the league as saying their view is that Denver is waiting for its opportunity to insert Osweiler for good.
I agree with that.
Okay, and they got their opportunity thanks to a torn plantar fascia.
But what I'm asking is this, Skip. If Peyton Manning, let's just say, because we're not privy to that, is you and I talking. Peyton Manning goes to the Broncos. This is it for me. Then to me, that article by Mike Sando, as legit as it is, that theory and all of that stuff goes out the window because it's clearly Brock Osweiler. It's all yours after this season. So now what it comes down to is, knowing this is the end, do you disrespect a healthy Peyton Manning by saying, we're going to roll with Brock Osweiler? I don't think you do that. It's Peyton Manning. And we all know, listen, and by the way, prior to the injury, Okay, yes, he had thrown like 11 interceptions and just 7 touchdown passes, but he was completing over 62% of his passes. All right, he was averaging over 250 yards passing per game. So when you look at it from that perspective, it wasn't like he was wetting the bed and stinking up the joint. He just wasn't Peyton Manning. He had 2 300-plus yard games, okay?
Yep.
I think it was against Detroit and Kansas City, if I remember correctly. That's about it. All I'm saying is he's Peyton Manning. And if Brock Osweiler looks like Dan Marino, that's why I brought Dan Marino up to the beginning, you got me. If he looked like that, because when Dan Marino came in, I mean, you know that better than me.
Yep.
When this dude came onto the scene, we were like, whoa, this brother's on another level. I mean, who is this? This guy is...
I mean, we knew who he was at Pitt.
But I knew he was...
There are other off-field issues that dropped him in the draft.
But listen, listen. That's when you talk about the struggle with the New York Jets. When you pick Ken O'Brien ahead of Dan Marino, that's what ruined your damn franchise, okay? But I'm just saying... I'm talking about a second-year dude that I saw falling back against the Pittsburgh Steelers and throw a 50-yard bomb for a touchdown to Mark Super-Duper. You understand? I mean, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
Doubt.
If we saw something like that from Brock Osweiler, that's fine.
Okay,
this 20 for 27 is relatively pedestrian.
All right, so here's the final analysis. So coming up next Sunday at Denver.
Yep.
Brock Osweiler, you said Tom Brady's standing in the way. Well, he's going to be standing right in his way next Sunday. But if ever you could beat Tom Brady, to me, we'll talk about this game in a little while on the show. Tonight, Buffalo's going to be a battle for them.
Yep.
Buffalo will take its pound of flesh physically from the Patriots, who then after Monday Night Football, short week of prep, are going to have to travel to Denver. When could they be more vulnerable? This is a game you picked when you thought it was going to be Peyton Manning. You picked Denver to stop the win streak, right? So,
right. But when I'm looking at you like that,
what I'm saying is, if Brock Osweiler is ever going to make a big splash, a real splash, he should be able to make it here.
To that point, Brady 2-5 at Mile High. He struggled there.
That's fine. But here's my question to you, Skip, based off of what you just said.
Yeah.
Are you saying that there should be a reason to contemplate, like if Osweiler shows up in New England and plays well, that you would rethink Denver's position on Peyton Manning?
No, I'm just trying to put into perspective what a great opportunity the kid is going to have. If ever you right?
Yeah,
you couldn't have a better opportunity against Tom Brady than at a place that's been a little bit of a house of horrors for him, except the game he played against Tim Tebow.
Let's just put it out there. Let's just put it out there. Brock Osweiler rolls up against New England and throws for 500 yards.
Yeah.
Might change everything.
I would think it would change
everything. They got to run the ball like they did yesterday. Season high, 170 yards.
It would help a lot.
Up next, the bad man came to play in Minnesota yesterday. Stephen A., the Pack is back, or are they? Don't miss that discussion at the other end of the break. Back in a minute.
You're not getting it. I'm going to give it to you free, okay? A Super Bowl. Who? America's eyes on me right now.
I believe that.
That makes my point.